The Rebbe starts off the Sicha by saying that we discussed many times that every single thing in Torah is a Hayrah, a lesson. Torah is from the word Hayrah, instruction to each and every Yid in all times, in all places, a lesson in his Avodas Hashem. Because Torah, as a Hayrah, is Nitzchis, is eternal. The Rebbe says the same thing is true in regards to the name of the Parsha, which was established according to Minig Yisrael, which Minig Yisrael, as we know, is Torah, that it too contains a lesson to each and every person. The Rebbe says the same thing is true in our Parsha. The name that Minig Yisrael, according to Minig Yisrael, it's called Parshas Emor. Says the Rebbe, even though the word Emor, which means saying, is referring to as the continuation of the pasuk, Emor LaKoyanim, say to the Koyanim, but since the Parsha is called not Emor LaKoyanim, but rather it's called just Emor, so certainly there must be a Hayrah from this word Emor, which means to say, a general Hayrah in each and every Yid. Says the Rebbe, we need to understand, the word Emor is not only saying a heter that you're allowed to speak, but it's like a command. Furthermore, the Rebbe says, it's being said without even any limitations. In other words, it seems to be implying that obviously was speaking about an appropriate thing to say, which we're being commanded on, Emor, say it. So we need to understand which Amira, what kind of saying are we talking about? What is being hinted by this? Now, says the Rebbe, you may think it's speaking about saying words of Torah. But the Rebbe says we can't really say that this is the Hayrah, it's the instruction that we should be saying and speaking words of Torah. Because, says the Rebbe, for this, we have a direct and clear tzivui, a direct command, the mitzvah in the Torah, where it says, v'dibartam. Torah tells us that we need to say, speak in the words of Torah. So therefore, there must be another message over here. Also, says the Rebbe, we need to understand what is the difference, and how do we define and differentiate between this appropriate way of speaking, where we're just saying speak and say things, compared to the Hayrah, and contrast that with the Hayrah, which is also just said in a very general and straightforward way. The Mishnah tells us that Emor ma'at, you should speak little. And loy matzasi leguf toiv mishsika, another Mishnah in Pirkei Avos is telling us that I didn't find anything else better for my body, better than silence. So how does that fit with this idea of Emor, just saying and speaking? The Rebbe points out, the Rebbe notes, in regards to this idea that it's better to be silent and not to talk and speak less. So the Rebbe says that regarding speaking the words of Torah, we find with the Rambam Paskins. And the Rambam says this in continuation to this idea of loy matzasi leguf, that I didn't find anything better for my body than silence. The Rambam says that v'chein b'divrei Torah, this is true even in words of Torah, even in words of wisdom. A person's words should be few and rather contain lots of content. But you should speak less. Now, even though it's true that in words of Torah one needs to increase, one needs to speak lots of words in Torah on the one hand, and as the Rambam himself elaborates in his Pirush HaMishnayos on this Mishnah, where it speaks about loy matzasi leguf, I didn't find anything better for my body rather than minimizing and talk in silence. The Rambam there goes through and he divides different types of speech, different levels of speech, different things, which is appropriate speech and not appropriate speech, better and worse, etc. The very, very first level is what the Rambam refers to, the dibur, that is obligated according to Torah. The mitzvah, the kind of dibur, the kind of speech where there's a mitzvah to do it. Reading the Torah, learning the Torah, reading Talmud, the explanations of Torah. The Rambam says about that, if a person would be able to speak it in his whole life, would be good. Now, even though, of course, the main mile over there is the content of the words of Torah, and as the Rambam himself says, that you need to make sure to increase more content, more ideas with less words, not the other way around. I'm saying lots of words and not really giving over much content. As the Rambam quotes and says, that Chazal say that a person should always teach to his Talmud, b'derech tzara, in a short way, in a concise way. Says the Rebbe, this doesn't mean that words of Torah can ever be in a negative way, and that's why you have to say less of them. It's only that the clarity and understanding of Torah is when you're giving over more ideas, but with less words. So again, we want to understand, where do we speak, what are we referring to when we say Emor, just in a general way, just speak and say, and how, again, this fits with where we speak about the idea of Emor Ma'at, saying less, etc. Says the Rebbe, generally the ideas of Torah Shebeksav, we can understand them better, they're more explained, more explicit, more in detail, more revealed in Torah Shebaal Peh. So in our case, the Rebbe is looking now at the Medrash on the very beginning of the Parsha, on this pasuk, Emor Lakoyanim. So the Medrash brings another pasuk, a pasuk in Tehillim, where it says, Imrois Hashem Amoris Toiris, Hashem's words, the things that Hashem says are pure. What does it mean Hashem's words are pure? So the Medrash says, the words of a human being aren't pure. And the Medrash gives an example. It's customary in the world that you have a king, a human king, coming into a city. All the people of the city are praising him, and he's really happy about the praise. It's pleasant for him. So he starts making them all sorts of promises. Today I'm going to build you this. Tomorrow I'm going to give you that. But then if he goes to sleep and he never wakes up the next morning, what happens to him and all of his promises? So they're all gone. So the words of a human being are not pure in the sense that not necessarily they'll be fulfilled. Says the Medrash, but Hashem is not so. As the pasuk says, "V'Hashem elikim emes," Hashem is true. And what's that truth related to? Amar Rabavin says, because he's elikim chayim u'melech olam, Hashem is the living Eibishter and king forever. So all of the words that he says also are fulfilled and come true forever. Says the Rebbe, since Yidden are called Chayim, they are alive, because they are Dvukim b'Hashem, because they are connected to Hashem who's alive. As the Pasuk says, Va'atem adveikim Hashem alekeichem, Chayim kulchem ayem, because you're cleaving to Hashem, that's why you're all alive. Says the Rebbe, if that's the case, it follows that so too by Yidden there's Kavayochel, this type of speech, this type of saying something to another person, which is also Tahira, which is also pure, which will surely be fulfilled. Furthermore, says the Rebbe, since we know tzaddikim doimim laboirim tzaddikim are compared in similar kavayochel to the Creator, so just like when Hashem says something, it's not only that surely it will end up coming to fruition in action, but rather the speech itself, the talk itself, actually affects, actually achieves, actually creates something. As we know, it says, "B'dvar Hashem shamayim nasu." With Hashem's words, the heaven was created. Ba'asarim amoris nivra olam, the whole world was created through the 10 utterances of Hashem. So too, Kavayachal, says the Rebbe, it's true also with tzaddikim, that there's the kind of speech that it itself causes something to happen. What kind of talking are we speaking about? What is this amira? What is the speech that we're talking about? Says the Rebbe, we can understand this from following the Medrash and the continuation of the next piece on the Medrash. The Medrash says, we find that the children in the time of David HaMelech, before they tasted the taste of sin, they knew how to expound the Torah to such an extent where they could find out every single thing, 49 reasons to explain why something should be Tomei, 49 things why the same thing should be Toher. David davened for them. David said, Hashem, Ato Hashem Tishmreim, Hashem guard them, protect them. Which, as the Medrash explains, means you should protect them, guard the Torah inside of them, and protect them from this generation which has a lot of people that speak negative things. Then the Medrash goes on and says, nevertheless, despite they were on such a high level, after all of this praise, when they would go out to war, the people would fall. And why is that? Because there were informers amongst them. That's why they fell. And the Medrash elaborates there about how terrible it is, how strict it is, the whole idea of Lashon Hara. The Medrash says that Lashon Hara is called Shlishi. It's related to, associated with the number 3, because it kills 3 people. The one who says the Lashon Hara, the one who accepts the Lashon Hara, receives it and hears it, and the person who it's being said about. Says the Rebbe, from this we can all understand that what is the proper Amira, what is the proper way of talking, which we get from the Hayra, from the word Emor, to speak, is exactly the opposite of Lashon Hara. It's speaking about the praise of another person. And then this praise itself is going to have an effect, as the Rebbe is going to explain in the continuation. Says the Rebbe, we're going to understand this by examining the words of the Rambam in Hilchos Deos. So we have 2 prakim. In Perikei, the Rambam is over there discussing how a Talmud Chacham needs to speak. And one of the things he says is, a Talmud Chacham is Mesaper b'shmach haveiroi. He speaks about the praise of his friend. V'loi b'gnusoi klal, and he doesn't speak about the disgrace of his friend at all. He doesn't say anything bad about his friend. Then in Perek Vav, the Rambam is here speaking about the general mitzvah of Avos Yisrael. The Rambam says it's a mitzvah for each person to love his friend, to love each and every Yid as his own body. As it says, V'ahavta l'recha kamoicha, the Rambam says, Lefichach, therefore, tzarich l'saper b'shmocha, you need to speak in the praise of another Yid. So the Rebbe says we need to understand. What does the Rambam mean with these words? Mesaper b'shvach haveru, you need to speak about the praise of your friend when he's speaking about it's being said about the Talmud Chacham, or also by the Talmud Chacham. What is the unique way of the Talmud Chacham speaking about the praise of his friend, different to a regular Yid? We just said that it's a chiyuv, it's an obligation, it's a mitzvah on every single Yid to speak the praise of another Yid. As the Rambam says, as we just mentioned from Perek Vav, mitzvah al kol adam, it's a mitzvah on every person to love each and every Yid like himself, and therefore he should speak in his praise. So the Rebbe first attempts an answer and says that simply we can answer the following way. The difference between these two halachas and these two different prakim is, in Perek Hey is where the Rambam is speaking about the dinim, the obligations of a Talmud Chacham, how it's related to the Talmud Chacham himself. In other words, the impact on the Talmud Chacham himself who's acting in that way. As the Rambam says, he starts off the Perek and says that just like a Chacham is recognizable, that means he is recognizable in his chachma, in his wisdom, in the way he behaves. He's separated in his ways from all the rest of the people. So too, it needs to be noticeable also in his actions, also in his speech. In other words, these are all things describing the qualities of the Talmud Chacham himself, who's standing separated and different to everybody else. As the Rambam himself concludes in that Perek and says that a person that acts in this way, regarding this person, the pasuk says, Hashem says, Avdiyata, you are my servant, Yisrael asher b'cho espoir, I pride with you, Yisrael. In other words, we're all focused on the person that's behaving in this particular way. That is, since he's a Talmud Chacham, so he needs to have all of these particular 10 things that the Rambam enumerates there. They all need to be in the best proper way, because as the Rambam says, that everyone praises him, and everyone loves him, everyone wants to emulate him, wants to copy his actions, and through that he causes a big Kiddush Hashem. But that's all in Perek Hey. In Perek Vav, what the main thing that's being discussed about, when they were speaking about the fulfillment of V'ahavta l'recha kamoicha, here the main focus is about the conduct of Yidden for the benefit of the recipient, for the benefit of the other Yid. And that's what most of the Perek is about the influence and the benefit that one person has on the other, starting from the beginning of the Perek. The Rambam speaks about that the way a person is created, he's always drawn in his characteristics and his actions, following his friends, following his colleagues, and therefore how one needs to behave, where he has to live, etc., etc. And so too, many in Yonim in this Perek are mitzvah shemen adam lachaveroi, which you're doing for the benefit of the other Yid, of the recipient. As the Rambam continues, it says, therefore, and that's the halacha we're quoting, therefore you need to speak in his praise, and you need to be mindful and care about the other person's money, just like you care about your own money, etc. Says the Rebbe, so this is the difference between these two halachas and these two different prakim. By the obligation, we speak about every Yid. This is in the second Perek, and Perek Vav, we're speaking of his praise regarding another Yid. You should speak in his praise because of the mitzvah of V'ahavta l'recha kamoicha. The emphasis is more about the benefit that the other guy is going to get, his honor. And therefore, just like you care about your own money, you should care about your friend's money. In other words, for his benefit, for the benefit of the recipient, of your friend. And that's the same thing of speaking about his praise, what he's going to gain out of it. Whereas when we're speaking about the Talmud Chacham in the previous Perek, speaking about his praise, here we're speaking about not for the benefit of the other person, but it's all part of what is a Talmud Chacham. What are the qualities of a Talmud Chacham? It's about his avoid, how he's going to bring the honor and Kiddush Hashem, etc. However, says that it's still not enough of an explanation. Because the Rambam adds regarding the Talmud Chacham, in addition to just saying that he speaks about Shvach Haveri, which he says in both places, but the Talmud Chacham, he also adds the words V'loy b'gnusoi klal. He doesn't say anything disgraceful about him at all. He doesn't speak about the disgrace of the other person. Now, seemingly, this idea that you're not supposed to speak negatively about someone, there shouldn't be any difference between the obligation on a Talmud Chacham and the obligation on all other people. Seemingly, this is part of the Isur of Lashon Hara, as the Rambam himself elaborates later in a separate page. And yet, he's putting this specifically by the Talmud Chacham. Says the Rebbe, even if you want to say that the Rambam is trying to emphasize to what extent the Talmud Chacham is careful with his words, that he doesn't speak b'gnusay klal, that he wouldn't say anything negative about his friend, nevertheless, seemingly, it should have been in the other order. The Rambam first should have said what's, in other words, the more strict thing and the more constant thing. Number one, Talmud Chacham never says anything disgraceful about his friend. And then you could add the other point that not only that, he also once in a while says nice things and praises his friend, etc. How can you go in this order by saying he speaks about the praise of his friend? And not only that, as well, he never says anything disgraceful about his friend. Says the Rebbe, so we must say that the Rambam is speaking about a special kind of gather, a special category within this idea of Mesaper B'Shvach Haveri, of speaking praise things about your friend, in which you also need to mention specifically to add the loy b'gnusay klal and nothing negative at all. What's the explanation? Says the Rebbe, the Rambam speaks about this thing by the Talmud Chacham was speaking in the praise of his friend. He says it in continuation to something that also says in Pirkei Avos, that v'donis kol adam l'kav schus, one of the things the Talmud Chacham does is judge everybody l'kav schus, for the favor. Says the Rebbe, so what are we speaking about over here? We're speaking about a person that clearly we need to be melamed schus about him. Clearly we need to judge him favorably. In other words, there was something negative that he was doing, and yet the Talmud Chacham that's trying to act in a pious way, as Pirkei Avos generally is Milsa de Chasidusa, says the Pirkei Avos, you should act in an extra pious way and nevertheless judge him favorably. The Rambam says the halacha about speaking b'shvach haveri, following this idea of judging people favorably. It's regarding this idea that the Rambam says, this chidush, that not only is he going to say praise about his friend, but v'loy b'gnusay klal, nothing disgraceful in him at all. In other words, he's saying the praise in a situation where seemingly there is disgrace. And not only that, not only is he going to say praise, but he's going to say it in the kind of way that the negativity will completely be negated. There's no negativity at all. Says the Rebbe, we still need to understand, if that's the case, why is it specific for a Talmud Chacham? Seemingly, again, this should apply to everyone. So the Rebbe says, to explain this, we're going to look at one thing even before V'donis Kol Adam L'Kav Schus. Before this, the Rambam is speaking about generally how a Talmud Chacham has to act in a way that Ruach HaBriyos Noiche Emenu, that people are pleased with him, people are happy with him. And this is why Diburei B'Nachasim Kol HaBriyos, he speaks calmly, nicely, patiently, pleasantly with people. And this causes, and this brings about a difference between a Talmud Chacham and all other people in their attitudes to someone that does have something disgraceful, that does have something negative. That is, when one sees something bad, something negative in another person, so obviously you need to do everything to get rid of it, to nullify it. But this itself can be done in two different ways. Someone that's not a Talmud Chacham, and therefore not necessarily is on this level in the highest way that Ruach HaBriyos Noiche Emenu, that everyone's completely pleased with him all the time. So, of course, he's going to be Moichiach, he's going to rebuke the other person, obviously according to the way Torah instructs, but he's going to rebuke him for his Averos. But the Talmud Chacham, who is supposed to be acting in a pleasant way, in a pleasing way with every single person, he has a totally different way of how to get rid of the disgrace, of the negative things of his friend, in a way of nachas. We say he speaks with nachas to people, in a calm, patient, pleasant way. What does he do? He speaks about the praise of his friend, v'loy b'gnusay klal, completely not focusing on the negative at all. That is, that the actual speaking and talking about the praise of the other person, that itself reveals that person's praise, his qualities, his good qualities. And that automatically causes that any negativity becomes weaker until ultimately being gone completely. The Rebbe says this is similar to what the Razal say in regards to Lashon Hara, something that we mentioned before. This is the Maimon Razal, that's the basis for the previous statement that we mentioned earlier. It says, Lashon Tlisoi, Kotel Tlisoi. Lashon Hara, which is related to the number 3, it kills 3 people. It kills the one who said it, the one who received it, the one who heard it, and the one who it's being said about. And seemingly, there's a big question over here. The fact that Lashon Hara harms the one who is saying it, the one who is listening to it, that we understand. Because both are participating in the Aveira of Lashon Hara. It's a very strict Aveira. To the extent that Chazal say that it's equal and similar to the Aveiris of Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayis, and Shvichas Damim altogether. But why are we saying that the person who is being spoken about is going to be harmed? Seemingly he didn't take any part in the Aveira. Why should he suffer as well? Says the Rebbe, the explanation is the characteristic of speech is that it brings things out from its concealed state into a revealed state, just like simply. You had something in your mind, you were thinking about, and now it's open to the public. Therefore, says the Rebbe, when we speak about someone's ra, something bad about someone else, and bringing it out in a revealed way through speech, that itself could have have a negative impact on the person. In other words, if we would have just left it alone, not spoken about it, so possibly that person's ra, the evil inside of him would have remained concealed, and it wouldn't bring negative results. But the actual fact that we're speaking about it, that itself is bringing it out, and therefore there are negative results. Now we know, says the Rebbe, there's a klal, a general rule, midah toiva, something on the good side is much more in a much greater way than something on the negative side. Says the Rebbe, so if negative talk about someone's disgrace, about someone's faults, could end up being harmful for the person, so how much more so, says the Rebbe, that it's so much more than this, in a midah toiva, and a good thing. Now when we speak about someone's good, when we speak about someone's qualities, then surely it's going to have an impact on the person that we're praising, and that itself gives him extra strength, extra assistance in his avodah. We are bringing out in a revealed way, in a practical way, his good and his qualities. Says the Rebbe to take it a step even deeper than this. The Rambam uses the expression "v'loi begnusoi klal." What's the Rambam saying? That a Talmud Chacham that fulfills the idea of dones kol adam, judging every person lekaf schus properly, eventually he won't even see at all the gnus, the negativity of another person. Says the Rebbe, how are we going to understand this? By looking a little bit more into this Maimer Azal, the dones kol adam lekaf schus. You should judge every person for the schus, for the favor, in a way of merit. The Alter Rebbe explains at length in Tanya what the Chazal say, another Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, Al Tadin, do not judge your fellow until you're in his place. The Alter Rebbe explains, because you look at another person and you realize that it's his place that caused him to sin, his circumstances that caused him to sin, because of the parnasa that he needs to be out in the streets and the marketplaces. He sees all sorts of things. Says the Rebbe, in a similar way, when we speak about v'dones kol adam lekaf schus, it's a similar idea. When we see someone doing something that's inappropriate, we need to find some sort of reason why it's not that person's fault, of why he had done this negative thing. Now, even though this will only help to remove the punishment, the guilt, or the fault of the other person who's doing the Aveira, in other words, he took off the choiv, the fact that he's guilty, but seemingly that's not a schus. Here we're saying, dones kol adam lekaf schus. Schus means merits, and schus is lashon that he's pure. So seemingly he didn't give him any merits over here. So why are we saying don lekaf schus if all you did is just remove the negative guilt or fault that he had? Says the Rebbe, the explanation is, when we see a Yid, that Hashem had given him tremendous challenges, like the example that the Rebbe says in Tanya, that his parnasa is that he needs to be out there in the streets and he sees things, etc., etc. That itself tells us, that itself is a proof that Hashem, who only demands of people what they're capable of doing, surely the Eibishter gave this person incredibly high koiches to be able to overcome these difficult challenges. So when we speak about limud schus, to be done as kol adam lekaf schus, it's not just the way we usually understand it simply. Don't think it's the person's fault. Rather, we're bringing out the side, the schus, the maila of the other person. We're focusing on the idea, wow, this person has such amazing koiches to be able to overcome even difficult nisyonos. And that's really what it means, v'havei dones kol adam lekaf schus. That's the inner meaning of it. When we are melamed chus, when a Yid is melamed chus on another person and speaks about what kind of great qualities the person has, what kind of great koiches the person has, that itself is going to reveal and bring out these hidden koiches that he has, so that they could practically come out and he'll actually be able to overcome these challenges, and through this ultimately really negating and nullifying, canceling out any of the negativity, as we mentioned earlier. And says the Rebbe, this is what the Rambam is saying, that a Talmud Chacham is done as kol adam lekav schus. So what does he do? Mesaper b'shvach haveira, he speaks about the praise of his friend, v'loy b'gnusei klal, and nothing negative about him at all. Meaning, the real Talmud Chacham that's done as kol adam lekav schus is transforming ultimately that gnus, that negativity, in schus. In other words, when he sees his friend's difficult challenges, when he sees in that itself, and that's why he focuses on it, the greatest powers of the neshama that person has, that's all part of shvach haveira, praising him. Therefore, he speaks about this praise, and that ends up causing v'loy b'gnusei klal, that there is no disgrace. Again, this nullifies all negativity. The person ends up, as a result of this, being able to overcome all of his challenges. Getting back now to the Hoirah of Emor, says it, but this is the Hoirah then of the name of the Parsha Emor. The attitude needs to be that we need to constantly be speaking in a lot of the praise of each and every Yid. Even someone that you need to be working on judging him l'kav schus. Because the actual speaking about it itself will accomplish, just like we said about Hashem Kavayachal, that his words actually change things, create things. So too, when one Yid speaks about another Yid's praise, that itself reveals and brings out his hidden good. It says that this will also fit with what the Razal say, and Rashi actually brings it in the beginning of the Parsha. On the words, Emor, and then it says again, V'yomarta. Rashi, what's this double expression? So simply the pasuk is speaking about the dinim of koyanim not becoming tamei. The pasuk, Rashi says, the pasuk is teaching us lahazir gedolim alaktanim, which we're warning the adults, making sure not to make tamei the children either. The Rebbe says the word lahazir is also from the word of zoyar, which means oir, light. What's this message teaching us? That the way the gedolim, the way the adults need to deal with and impact the ktanim. And when we say ktanim, it doesn't only mean in age, it also can mean in level, in avodas Hashem. How do we make sure someone removes himself, separates from all negativity? Is mainly not by dealing with dealing with the negativity. We know that there's the command of smoil doicha, but with the left hand, sometimes you have to push someone away. But the Rebbe says smoil means the left hand. In other words, sometimes you have to use your weaker hand to actually push someone away. But generally, that's not the attitude. The main way of dealing with someone is lahazir, to bring light. Yimin bikareves, act with your right hand. Through revealing in the other person that hidden good that's found in these ktanim. So that it will be in a way of lahazir, that the hidden good that's inside of them will be shining and bright and illuminating. Says the Rebbe, with this we'll also understand why, in fact, the pasuk uses the word emoir in this case, and not daber. The difference between dibur and amira is that dibur is usually a much harsher expression, which would mean it's a way of dealing with the ra in a way where you're trying to break it. Whereas amira, the term amira, is usually a softer type of speaking, which is this idea of revealing the good in the other person so that anything negative automatically by itself is already cancelled out. Says the Rebbe, according to all of this, we could also understand the connection of this Hoirah of Emor to the Rebbe Maharash, whose Yom Haledes Beis falls out in the year that the Rebbe edited the Sicha, and many other years, falls out in the week of Parshas Emor. Says the Rebbe, it's known the Pisgam, the statement of the Rebbe Maharash. The Weltzog, the rest of the world says, if you can't go under, you need to go over. And I hold, said the Rebbe Maharash, that you need to go lechatchila riber, straight from the outset, you need to go over. What is the difference between this attitude of arunter and lechatchila riber, going under or going over in avodas Hashem? Says the Rebbe, arunter, going under would mean that you're dealing with the negativity, you're dealing with the lowly things. You try to overcome the negative things, and you try to do it. There's a lot of work, there's a lot of effort. What does lechatchila riber mean? That right from the outset, you're just dealing with things that are much higher. You're just dealing with the good, with the light, with the positive. And you're adding so much to the good to such an extent that automatically the bad gets weaker and cancelled out completely. Says the Rebbe, this is the idea of Emor. that the way we are the way of nullifying all negative things of a yid is in a way of lechatchila riber. And when we act in this way, and acting in a way of toiv shamayim v'toiv labriyas, this is good both for shamayim, for Hashem, so to speak, and for people down here. As the Mishnah says, Tiferes lo yiseh v'tiferes lo min adam. This is the way you're acting that's both beautiful for the person doing it and for other people. And furthermore, this is the Mishnah uses the term Tiferes. So this is Tiferes Shebet Tiferes, the beauty on all sides, which is actually the sphere of the Yom Haledes of the Rebbe Maharash. So then, as the Rambam says regarding to a Talmud Chacham, a word also similar to Tiferes, the Rambam says regarding a Talmud Chacham, which ultimately the Rebbe says every Yid is on the level of a Talmud Chacham. Every Yid will eventually be there, as the promise V'chol B'nayich Limudei Hashem. All Yidden are on this level of students of Hashem. Says the Rambam, on this kind of person, the pasuk says Yisrael asher b'cha espor, similar to Tiferes. That the Eibishter says about the Yidden that I pride myself in you.